This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
So a Conservative Member of Parliament, Chris Heaton-Harris, Tory MP, was for 10 years an MEP, so someone that I know quite well. In the campaign, a staunch Brexiteer. He's a junior government whip, and he wrote to all the universities in the country a letter asking for a list of professors and asking for the syllabus that is being taught to people in our universities about Brexit. One guesses that he did it because he was concerned that maybe Brexit was being presented at universities in a bad light, and there's certainly plenty of rumour and gossip about that. But was he right? Was it a fair thing for him to do? Huge response that's come from the universities. Was it actually McCarthyism? Was it him trying to single out individual lecturers and professors whose view of the world he didn't like in a campaign to have them removed? Was he guilty, perhaps ultimately, of censorship? And I wonder, are you happy with the way the universities are teaching Brexit, what their attitude towards Brexit is? Do you think they're fair and they're balanced? Or was Chris Heaton-Harris's suspicion right? I don't know. I want to hear from you, and I particularly want to hear from you if you're at university or you've recently been at university. Is this impression that people like me have that the universities are hugely biased in favour of Remain? Am I right about that? And I say it because 21 vice-chancellors of our biggest universities came out very early in the Brexit campaign without consulting their boards to say their universities were in favour of Remain. Is there a bias within these universities? Is Mr. Heaton-Harris right, or was he actually trying to intimidate university lecturers? Let me know what you think by calling me on 0345 6060 973. Text your opinions to 84850, and you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. You can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Well, somebody with a strong opinion of what Chris Heaton-Harris did earlier this week is Tom Brake, Member of Parliament for Carshalton and Wallington, and the Liberal Democrat Brexit spokesman. Tom, good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning. Now, you had some reservations about Mr. Heaton-Harris's behaviour here.
Yes, first of all, it's not clear whether his intention was to intimidate or not, but certainly the perception from the universities was that was his intention. One other aspect of this, which I think we need to get to the bottom of, is whether this was in fact a research project, according to one of the ministers, Joe Johnson, that Mr. Heaton-Harris was carrying out for the purposes of a book that he is writing. Mm-hmm. And if that is the case, then I'm afraid Mr. Heaton-Harris, A, should have made that obvious in his letter, and B, should not have been using House Commons paper for that purpose.
Well, certainly, Tom, if he was going to write a book and sell it for money, yeah, you're quite right, that would have been wrong. So, but research can be for all sorts of reasons, can't it? It can be for him to help to form his own political opinions. I think Mr. Heaton-Harris, he's a strong Brexiteer. He did it, Tom, didn't he? Because, and this is me guessing, if he wants to come on the show and tell me, he can, but he did it because he suspects that Brexit is being taught in a very, very negative light at our universities right now.
Well, he may suspect that. I'm not sure that he has any evidence to that effect. And I think the difficulty with this is that if, for instance, we had a report in the British press of a senior Turkish politician writing to Turkish academics saying, please set out for me what you are teaching students in relation to certain aspects of Turkish politics, we, I think, rightly would have felt, well, that was an attempt by a senior Turkish minister to put pressure on academics to toe the line. I guess the real issue, of course, is whether, in fact, there is a line that one has to toe in relation to Brexit, or whether academics are simply saying, this is the understanding of what is going to happen. And one of the difficulties that Mr. Heaton-Harris has, of course, is that the 50-plus sectoral reports that the government have commissioned, which we as taxpayers have paid for, that are looking at the impact of Brexit in over 50 sectors, the government are not willing to release that. So it's actually difficult for certainly the public to know what the impact of Brexit is, because the government's not willing to share with us.
Yeah, that's a slightly separate argument, though, isn't it? I mean, the real question here is, Tom, do you feel that our universities, in the run-up to the referendum and since, have behaved even-handedly and fairly?
Well, that depends on whether you think there is an even-handed approach to something as crucial as the impact of Brexit. Equally, is there an even-handed approach? Should one?
Yes, of course, Tom. The answer is, of course, there is. Of course, there is. I think Brexit's a liberation, the greatest thing we've done for centuries. You think it's a disaster, but they're two opinions. Yeah. But they're two opinions, aren't they? Surely the job of any academic institution is to encourage their students to see both sides of that argument and, through their own critical thought process, to make up their own minds.
Well, yes, but equally in relation to something like Brexit, I know clearly you're a strong Brexiteer,
sure.
But in fact the evidence of economists, the evidence, what businesses were worried about was that there would be a very significant impact on I
tell you what, Tom. I tell you what.
There was only a minority of businesses, a very small minority.
Tom, I could take you. I could take you this week. I could take you this week to meet some of the biggest, most successful entrepreneurs this country has produced, in the last several hundred years, who would tell you they think Brexit is a fantastic global opportunity for the country. But that isn't the point, is it? Surely the point about university is that the universities should not take political sides on matters like this.
Well, you're interpreting a position, and frankly, we don't know what the position they're adopting is in any sort of true sense, but you're assuming that they have to give a balanced economic position on these are the advantages of Brexit, these are the disadvantages of Brexit, but if the balance of opinion is in fact very strongly, for instance, in favour of there being a very negative impact of Brexit, then surely they are entitled to represent that. Yes, of course, they can flag up that there are people like you who think it will deliver for the country, but the majority of people in the CBI, for instance, felt that...
Oh, yeah. The CBI wanted us to join. But that is a separate argument. Tom, so you think, according to your view of this and what economists or the CBI think, do you think it was absolutely fine and reasonable for 21 vice-chancellors of those universities in the referendum to stand up and say, we're advocating Remain?
They have to, I guess, look at the impact on them as a university, and it's very clear that the university sector, particularly in terms of science and research funding, has in fact been a net beneficiary of our membership of the European Union, so I'm sure they're reflecting that, and of course they're also reflecting on the fact that universities are part of often an EU-wide, yes, sometimes with Americans as well, but principally EU-wide networks who deliver on a range of projects. So I'm sure that is what they were looking at in terms of
money.
Is this going to be good for us or not?
Money, that's what they were looking at. Tom, wasn't it? Money.
They were looking at research, they were looking at exchange, they were looking at the benefits that they got as universities from having a close working relationship with the EU partners, which is now going to be damaged, I'm afraid, as a result of Brexit.
And what should Mr Heaton-Harris do now, in your view?
Well, Mr Heaton-Harris, he's obviously put that request out there. It hasn't been treated very favourably with the universities. I think at this point he needs to desist and stop pursuing an agenda which, even if it isn't his intention, can clearly be perceived as an attempt to put pressure on the universities to toe whatever he thinks is the right line.
OK. Tom Brake, thank you ever so much indeed for that opinion. Well, Tom and I couldn't be further apart on this. He thinks that because the CBI and economists during the campaign and since think it's going to be a disaster, that it's perfectly reasonable for the universities to teach in that way. I think it's an outrage. I don't think universities should take positions on this. I think they did it during the referendum. Do you know why? Do you know Oxford University, Oxford and Cambridge between them, get 100 million quid a year from the European Union? that effectively what the EU has done through its funding and research programmes is something I'm not even sure that totalitarian regimes are as successful at taking over the tertiary sector of education in the way that the European Union have. And I think it is unbelievable that 21 vice-chancellors, during the course of that referendum campaign, urged a Remain vote. I don't think we're teaching our young people genuine critical thinking. I'm worried about it, and I see example after example of young people saying to me, actually, they dare not admit to their peer group that they are pro-Brexit or that they voted Brexit, that even if they're writing in their essays, they fear they might be marked down if they're in favour of Brexit. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I've got carried away with this. Tell me actually it's all fine and dandy and that Tom Brake's opinion is right, that it's OK to teach a slightly negative view of Brexit because the CBI think that's the case. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:15. Chris Heaton-Harris, Member of Parliament, Junior Whip, writes to the universities and says, please tell me who's teaching Brexit and what the syllabus is. Are the young people there being given a fair and balanced view? And he's met with outrage. He's behaving like a McCarthyite, a censor. Thou doth protest too much, I thought, very, very quickly. And I just interviewed Tom Brake, who's the Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament for Carshalton and Wallington, and he's their Brexit spokesman. And he genuinely believes that because the CBI and other economists and businesses say Brexit's a negative, that is what the universities should be teaching. And I passionately disagree with that. I think the universities should be absolutely neutral. Tough, though, when they're getting all this money, isn't it, really? I wonder what Catherine in Ealing makes of this debate. Good morning, Catherine.
Oh, hello, Nigel. Yes, well, there's an article in the Sunday Telegraph today on this very issue.
There is.
And students are saying exactly what you're saying, that they can't express their views because they feel they're going to get marked down in their essays if they come out in favour of Brexit or make arguments in favour of Brexit. And they feel obliged to, toe the line and be pro-Remain when they're not really like. That isn't their real views. And
yes,
that, in my mind, is not university education.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Catherine. I couldn't agree more. Surely critical thinking is that young people are exposed to both sides of an argument and make their own minds up.
Yes, that's what the university should be doing. They should be saying, OK, look, we get all this funding from the EU for our research and put that on the one side. On the other hand, they should say, in the 1970 referendum, people voted to be in the common market. They didn't vote to be in the European Union. They were given assurances then that there were no plans for further economic or political union.
Do you feel, Catherine, like me, that something has gone drastically wrong with our universities?
Oh, definitely. I think it's basically people are buying a degree now. They're paying £9,000, or their parents are. They're buying that degree. And I think that, I went to university a long time ago, but it wasn't like that then. It was, genuinely, you got a really good education. You were able to express yourself. And freedom of speech, freedom of thought was the thing most valued when I was there, certainly.
And so it still should be. Catherine, I thank you very much. It's even worse than Catherine says, because it isn't just large sums of money that are going into research. There are large sums of money actually directly going into, from the European Union, what students are taught. Jean Monnet, for those who don't know, was a French super bureaucrat who was the father of the modern-day European Union. We now have scattered throughout British universities Jean Monnet chairs, Jean Monnet modules, Jean Monnet centres of excellence, where the European Union pays professors to teach people about the benefits of integration and the benefits of the European Union. And in 2014 and 15, in this country alone, over £1 million was spent paying for those departments to teach people one side of the coin. And that's outrageous. Universities should not take money from political organisations to teach their own ideology. And that is the trap that further education in this country has fallen into, and it needs to end, and it needs to end quickly. And I'm amazed that no one talks about this. I've come up against, on interviews, professors that have put on TV shows, radio programmes against me, even big debates against me. And when I challenge them and I ask them, are you a Jean Monnet professor? Well, they sort of mumble and stumble a little bit, and then they admit that they are, and that should not exist within our system. And one of the benefits of Brexit, perhaps, folks, is we can sack all of these people, we can fund the universities ourselves, perhaps put a watchdog in place to make sure they teach everything impartially and fairly, because they're not doing it now. Matthew is calling from Wandsworth. Matthew, hello, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Pleasure to speak to you. Now, are you a student?
I am, yeah.
So don't tell me where, because that wouldn't be fair. But, I mean, I've been very critical this morning of the fact that I don't think critical analysis is happening properly in our universities. Tell me I'm wrong.
I'm afraid you're absolutely right. And here's the thing. I'm not studying politics or anything that should really be associated with politics at all.
Right.
But even then, these lecturers will find a way to slip in gags about Brexit, or, you know, you have an Italian lecturer say, after 15 years in this country, I'm being told I've got to go home. It's absolutely ridiculous. The general attitude here is so anti-Brexit that you can't get a word in edgeways.
And what if you, Matthew, in the coffee room or canteen, were to say that you were pro-Brexit? How would you be treated by your fellow students?
Well, to be fair, I'm at a university which is generally slightly more conservative than most. But even here, it's still a sort of fringe attitude to hold. And, you know, heaven forbid you support Trump as well, then you're sort of the arch nemesis.
Yeah, I know. what position that puts me in, Matthew. But, yeah, so I wonder, you know, is it the universities that have encouraged large numbers of our young people to think this way? Or would large numbers of our young people think this way anyway?
Frankly, I think they would be thinking this way before they got here, but it's the fact that they're never challenged and they're told this is the view you should have, and they're encouraged. They joke about it, they go along with it, and they've no reason to ever think otherwise, because they don't ever get told that you should make your own mind up.
Make your own mind up. Matthew, I thank you very much for that call. David Lawson sends in by text, and I couldn't agree more with this. Universities should be teaching how to think, not what to think. David, that sums it up, to me, absolutely beautifully. I'm going to Connor, who's calling from Glasgow. Connor, good morning.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for having me. I'm just calling to say this MP calling at the universities, I do think it is an attack on academia, in the sense that you are, if you get into university, you are clearly an intelligent person who is thoughtful and can challenge an opinion. When you're in university, you're there to challenge the opinions. If a lecturer has an opinion, you are able to challenge that. You can go off and research in a library and think for yourself. University is there to make you a more intelligent and more thoughtful person, regardless of what subject you're doing.
Well, that's certainly true.
You're not supposed to take things at face value.
That's certainly true, Connor. But what, Connor, if every single lecturer you've got has the same point of view? It's a little bit trickier then, isn't it?
You're still able to, you're still able to go out. As I say, you're not supposed to take it at face value. You're able to go out and look at all this stuff yourself. And there's a plethora of media that you can go and look at that has differing opinions, and you can make up to yourself what suits you the best. But I think this MP going there, it's almost like a witch hunt, is how one of my other friends described it to me.
Do you think, Connor, on the subject of the European Union and Brexit, do you think our universities take an even-handed approach?
Thinking about it terms financially, probably not at all, because I do a science subject at university. Yeah. So our department is very much heavily handed with, EU grants, as well as many other, subjects within academia. English, maths, science, arts, they're all helped by the EU. And in that terms, I'd say, they're maybe not as balanced as they could be. But in terms of lectures that you actually see day to day, and the institution itself, I feel should be neutral. But people inside can have their opinion, and they can't talk about it. University is a place to talk about things.
Well, it ought to be, but surely, Connor, he who pays the piper, calls the tune to a very large extent. I mean, the extent to which these departments are funded by the European Union actually makes it rather difficult to speak out against them. They even accept Jean Monnet chairs in universities.
Well, again, he's a big part. He's a big part of the EU, as you were saying. You know, he was one of the founding, people that. For example, I've got a friend that studies EU law. You know, she's learning about him right now. You know, you can't exactly ignore him in that sense.
No, you can't ignore him, but you should.
In the fact that he founded it, but then again, you can't just ignore him for what benefits it may or may not have had. And even though they may be teaching the benefits, I would like to think they are teaching the disadvantages as well. Because, as you say, university is a place for free thinking.
It's a place for free,
and they should be.
No, they should be. They should be. But Connor, you do agree with me that at the moment they're not teaching things in an even-handed way.
Well, I can't exactly say that because I've not witnessed it throughout an entire country's worth of universities.
Okay, all right. No, Connor, thank you. I know. I was listening to the referendum to, our science faculties couldn't exist at our universities without EU funding. That is where future science and development will come from. How on earth Newton and Darwin managed before the European Union is beyond me. I'm going to ask Scott from Wigan what he thinks about the state of our universities. Are they fair? Are they balanced? Are they even on the subject of Brexit?
Hi, Nigel. Am I on?
You are. Good morning.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I just want to give my own personal experience. I was in university when the referendum was taking place. And what I found is that a lot of the Remainers were very loud, very kind of boisterous about their actual opinion. And the Leavers, I mean, my group of friends, I couldn't really tell who wants to leave and who wants to remain until you kind of go to the pub and you have a proper conversation about it. And you find that the Leavers are very quiet and they don't really like to say, whether their opinion on leaving because they're scared about being bullied by the left because, they just don't want to be kind of slated for it. That's what I found. But on university lecturers as well, I remember 3 distinct lecturers kind of like preaching to us on the fact that we need to vote Remain. And that's the reason I called up today, just to kind of say that, that is valid.
Scott,
the point that you were making.
Scott, you have described a culture and you have described an environment and you have described teaching and you've confirmed all of my very worst fears. And I thank you for coming on LBC and for saying that. Well, that's Scott telling you his experiences during the referendum at a British university. I'm not in the least surprised. In fact, for the number of people that have been in contact with me on this subject, I'm pretty convinced Scott is right. But your job is to call 0345 6060 973 and to tell me I'm talking baloney. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and time for the news with 11:30. I want to thank Chris Heaton-Harris, the Conservative MP, for getting a debate going on universities. Are they teaching Brexit fairly? And I think it's a great debate for us to have, not just today on this programme, but more generally within this country. Are we still teaching critical thinking? Are we teaching young people there are two sides of an argument and make your own mind up? Or is Tom Brake, the Lib Dem Member of Parliament and Brexit spokesman for the Lib Dems, is he right that actually we should be teaching people that Brexit's negative because the CBI and so many economists think that it is? I'm completely opposed to that. I also believe there's a lot of bias, real political bias, in universities. Jane from Essex says, Nigel, why do you discriminate against anyone with an education that is academic or inquisitive? Do you not want people to discuss facts in an intelligent way? Yes, Jane, I do. Let me give you some of my experiences of British universities as leader of UKIP, a legitimate, lawful political party that won the European elections in 2014 and got 4 million votes in the general election in 2015. These were my experiences. With the University of East Anglia, we found that an senior elected UKIP official was banned from speaking on campus because students had said they felt intimidated and degraded for the presence of UKIP there. It was very clear that at Derby there was a no-platform policy for UKIP. That happened in November 2012. And it got worse than that. In fact, the university themselves said at Derby that students had a right to feel safe while studying on campus. Nottingham Trent University students were banned from starting a UKIP society. At Brighton Pavilion, the UKIP candidate was pelted. Well, maybe that's fair enough. And perhaps worst of all, and this is not so much at the universities, it's I'm perhaps talking about students themselves and how they're organising and mobilising, that the National Union of Students voted in 2014. They announced their opposition to UKIP as a party, but would not condemn ISIS. Begin to ask yourself, if the National Union of Students have got into that situation, what on earth is going on? So I'm not saying it's just the universities. For some reason, youngsters in this country have a very negative view of Brexit, a very negative view, particularly of UKIP, whilst across the whole of the rest of the continent, every single Sunday, whether it's the Czech Republic or the Austrian elections, we see vast swathes of young people voting for protest parties of the left, the centre and the right. Aaron is calling me from Glastonbury. Aaron, good morning.
Hello, Nigel.
What is your experience of university bias or otherwise?
Well, this is what I kind of wanted to say, because I think it's very interesting. I think the study that's been going on that you've been talking about is a very interesting test of Brexit in the UK. But I think, if I'm honest, it's when you get to university, people are already ready to think critically. They're already encouraged to kind of oppose opinions. I think really where the problem is lying, I think maybe part of the reason why so many young people in the UK are against Brexit is because of secondary schools, and I think that's maybe where we maybe wanting to look more so than universities, because I think it's from my experiences, I've been in classrooms full of 15, 16-year-olds where we've literally been told that Brexit is unthinkable, and obviously I'm 19 now, so this will be years before the referendum, that even a referendum on Brexit would have been completely unthinkable, and a Brexit vote would just be completely unimaginable and completely off the cards. So I think, if I'm honest, universities, I'm not saying there isn't bias at universities, and I'm not saying that if there is, it's unimportant. But secondary, I mean, I wanted to kind of ask you as well. Do you really think that university students are that impressionable to adopt the opinions of their lecturers, or do you think?
No, I think, and we had Connor on the phone from Glasgow earlier saying, look, young people are more than capable of challenging what a lecturer or professor says to them, and that's true. But if every single lecturer says one way, and if the whole atmosphere of the place is one way, it starts to and if you're abused for daring to question it, then it becomes more difficult. And I think your telephone call is very interesting, because I think, and I've said this already on this programme, but I think by the time people get to university, many of them are of this mindset already.
Absolutely. And
what university does, frankly, is to confirm that. I can give you, Aaron, an example of a young man. He was 15, he was nearly 16, and his father was called at the workplace and called into school because his son was in trouble. The police had turned up, and this was a school just outside Southampton, and I'm talking about 18 months ago. The police had been called, and so the father, and I've subsequently met the student and the father was called in thinking, crikey, what on earth? What has my son done that the police have been called? And so he turned up to be told that his son had been looking during the lunch hour in the school computer room, sort of adjunct to the library, looking at inappropriate material online. So, again, the father thinks, gosh, is he supporting ISIS? Is he involved in some criminal network? No. The son had been looking at UKIP's website during his lunch hour, and some of the attached comment streams that had gone with that, and for that, just 2.5 years ago, the police were called. So I think, and I think so, Aaron. I think you're right. I think you're onto something. I do know that EU propaganda gets pumped out through even as early as primary school, where packs have been going to the schools over the last few years, saying things like there used to be horrible world wars in Europe, but now we've got the European Union, this can never happen again. So, Aaron, I thank you for your call, and I think that's a very important part of this whole jigsaw. Martin is calling from Epsom. Martin, good morning. What's your experience?
Good morning, Nigel. First of all, I have to point out I voted Remain, but I have absolutely no love for the NUS either. So that's aside. During the referendum, students at my university organised a big debate with our local MP, with the candidates from all different parties. And the university, this became so popular, the university didn't have the security facilities that could take on the amount of people that wanted to be there and be at the debate. So we insisted that the UKIP candidate, who obviously didn't win any kind of general election, but that he came along and made the point for Brexit. Obviously, being a university area, we voted overwhelmingly Remain. But still, the UKIP candidate, we insisted that they come along, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students came along. It was a big thing. We held it in the local cathedral, rented that out. The head of the debating union at my university paid for it out of his own pocket.
Fantastic.
To get the cathedral. Unfortunately, I have to totally disagree with you. The atmosphere of debate, at least at my university, was extremely healthy. People looked at both sides of the argument. This isn't school. University are given the fact that independent study. It's not, 2 + 2 is 4. It's, here's 2 and here's 2, and let's see if you can, put it together and make 4.
Well, Martin, that's a great story. It's a great story, and the fact that the tutor paid out of his own pocket for the cathedral. You've just told me a fantastic story. That is exactly how argument and debate within schools and universities, I'm going to add schools in after that last phone call, that's exactly how it should work. So I'm very happy to hear your phone call, but Martin, I'm hearing many people from other universities where UKIP candidates are being banned from speaking. That can't be right, can it?
Personally, I do take some issue with that. I also think that they're under no kind of legal obligation to do that. I think that, I deeply, deeply, deeply disagree with people like yourself. But I think the only way we're ever going to get rid of that sort of mindset is by challenging it and openly debating and fairly debating that and making the case for liberal politics. But what specifically with the newspaper article about Chris Heaton-Harris, well, who else had a list of names right? That was Joseph Stalin. There is an echo of that. No way am I comparing.
Well, I think Stalin would be very proud of Jean Monnet chairs in universities funded by the European Union. I mean, would you support the principle of Jean Monnet chairs, Martin?
I studied German at university, right? So it was heavily European politics all over. All of my lecturers were obviously fairly left-wing, especially economically.
Why obviously?
And politically. That's a very good question.
It is a good question. I'm asking whether, what I'm asking, Martin, is whether our young people, through school and university, are being given an even-handed assessment of the way the world is, encouraged to see both points of view, and then told, through critical thought, you make your own mind up. And you just said to me, obviously, most of them were left-wing. There's something wrong with that, isn't there?
I think statistically, if you were to come up with some sort of visual graph, as the academic qualifications go up, so bachelor, GCSEs, A-levels, bachelors, PhDs, professorships, I think as those go up, you would probably see a trend of leaning further to the left. Now, but I was fully capable of challenging my lecturer whenever he said something like. Something pro-Corbyn, for example, and I'm absolutely not. And there was an absolute atmosphere of fair debate there because, just because someone says, this is wrong and that's wrong, I'm saying, yes, it is wrong, but it can be fixed in other ways.
And challenged.
There is absolutely no silencing. And, I would never vote for Corbyn and I would never vote for Theresa May. But
Martin, you're very good at making your own mind up. You've also had the benefit of a university education where Brexit clearly was handled correctly as an issue. There are many who don't share that experience. I fear, that's my view, challenge me if you think I'm wrong. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:46. Do our schools and universities teach our younger people about Brexit in a fair, even and balanced way? Or is it, as Tom Brake, Lib Dem MP, suggested earlier on in this hour, perfectly reasonable to teach a negative view of Brexit because the CBI and so many economists think it could be a bad thing? And before I get there, it's Sunday, so a sort of slight religious spot for a moment, if we could. A church in Leicestershire that has got, I won't say exactly where, but a church in Leicestershire that's got a new vicar has decided that for its annual Remembrance Day service which has been going on in that church for over a century, that one of the fixtures of that service has always been the hymn, Onward, Christian Soldiers. You all know it. You've all sung it, I guess, at some point in your life out there, or most of you will. The vicar has decided that he's going to drop that particular hymn for fear that it might cause offence to non-Christians. Well, I'll tell you what, mate, just sell the church off, turn it into a local hotel and give up on the Church of England completely. You know, I can't see the point of being a vicar in the Church of England unless you believe in Christianity and believe in your message whilst tolerating all other forms of religion and different people. But this kind of aggressive secularism that is moving through our country, that is intimidating young vicars like this, and frankly, he ought to stand firm. Other religions do, in defence of what they believe in. Back to this issue. Is the EU, through its money and its Monet professorships and everything else, twisting our universities into being places that are not teaching young people genuine critical analysis, that there are two sides to an argument and they ought to make their own minds up? Jordan is calling me from Brixton. Jordan, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Nigel. I think it's an interesting point that you make, because as a Remain voter, I sort of see the situation as the facts are that 52% of the voting population did vote for Brexit.
Yep.
So I don't agree with the idea that it's possible that 52% of the voting population could make their mind up purely based on ignorance and misinformation. So you've got to sort of recognize the fact that there is a shared sort of political argument or ideology there that we then, as a democratic society, have we have to explore unbiasedly. You know, so I think it's ironic that universities can play the sort of censorship card when questioned about the way they're teaching these topics that have, you know, a bit of political relevance, you know, today. And if it's true that they're creating an atmosphere where some students can't confidently express their views that might be anti-Europe, then, you know, it sort of draws parallels to, you know, sort of North Korean education, where they teach a political rhetoric about the supreme leader at the same time they teach their students. It's not really, it doesn't really fit British ideals in the way that...
So Jordan, do you suspect something is wrong with the universities on this?
Oh yeah, definitely. But I think it's an endemic of a society where money buys political influence anyway. We see it through every level of society.
Yep.
So the fact that the EU are playing the exact same game, they're playing the game that we taught them to play.
Well, they're playing it very well, Jordan, because they seem to have bought off virtually every Vice-Chancellor in the country. No, Jordan, listen, as a Remain voter, you've given a very even-handed approach to that. It's a very, very good phone call. And I have to say that one of the benefits of Brexit is that our universities will not be receiving any money from the European Union. We can close down the Jean Monnet scholarships, and we can make sure, I hope, that our universities get back to that great global tradition that they had. You know, we're supposed to have some of the greatest universities in the world, but they can't be great if they're not prepared to give one side of an argument an even hand. Jordan, great call there from Brixton. Barbara says, trying to brainwash students into voting one way is not only abuse of the lecturer's position, it's also interfering with the electoral process. If universities have been doing this, perhaps consideration needs to be given to raising the voting age to protect students from being used in this way. Wow, Barbara, that's radical, because all around me there are people saying we should reduce the voting age to 16, or is it 14, or I can't remember. But they're all talking about reducing the voting age. Your point is a very interesting one. I think it'll probably have a few people listening to this programme screaming at the radio, but nonetheless, we've made it. Marion is calling me from Finchley. Marion, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Pleasure to talk to you. I'm a Brexiteer, so is my husband. He's an immigrant, and we both have studied what the European Union's been doing for decades. We certainly didn't vote on June the 23rd out of ignorance. I'm looking forward to Independence Day being declared as soon as possible on June the 23rd, and a bank holiday maybe. Anyway, my point is universities, of course, should be absolutely neutral in the way they present ideas so that students make up their own minds. But the people who've been ringing who are saying that students are not impressionable, they will make up their own minds, have they looked back at the 1930s when Philby, Maclean, Burgess, Anthony Blunt, later Sir Anthony Blunt, were all recruited at Cambridge, and many others that we will never know about. And the lecturers were totally committed KGB agents, and they recruited these young men who most certainly came from educated, privileged backgrounds, and they were all recruited to be KGB agents.
Marion, they were. It's a long time ago, but they were. I wouldn't wish to draw any direct parallels between then and now. But listen, the point you make is an interesting one, that actually not all, but many young people are pretty impressionable. Thank you, Marion. As for Independence Day, who knows? Perhaps the Catalans will beat us to it. Who's to say? Given the time our government is taking with the Brexit process. And I've got time for one last caller this morning, and it's Tony, who's calling from Wimbledon. Good morning, Tony.
Hey, Nigel.
Good morning. So what do you think? Am I right to assert that the universities are not being even-handed in teaching our young people that on Brexit there are two very clear points of view and that the individual should make their own minds up?
I think asking the individual to make their minds up is absolutely the right thing to do. I think where I have an issue is when you make that assertion, because is that based on fact? I mean, can I ask you, do you have information that says, not anecdotal, do you have facts?
Yes, Tony, I have 21 Vice-Chancellors coming out without even referring to their boards and saying, vote Remain. I have the fact that the EUs are not just funded by the European Union, but they've set up Jean Monnet chairs throughout British universities. Yes, Tony, it is based on fact. Tony, I thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time. It is based on fact, and yeah, sure, I'm sure there are some universities where there's an even-handed approach, but I thought the approach of Tom Brake, the Liberal Democrat MP and Brexit spokesman, said it's fair for universities to be negative about Brexit because of the economics. For me, frankly, said it all. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 3 o'clock, it's Alex Salmond. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel.